I need you to stop whatever you're doing and pay attention to what I'm about to show you, because what landed in my inbox last week might be the single most unsettling piece of Bigfoot footage I've ever come across. And trust me, I've seen a lot. I've sat through thousands of blurry trail cam clips, shaky phone videos, and grainy photos that could be anything from a bear to a guy in a Halloween costume. But this one stopped me cold. This one is different. The footage comes from a Reddit post uploaded in early 2026 by a hunter in Alaska.
Bro, like, look how wide these are from each other. What the f*** is that? Like, these are mine. What the f*** is that, bro? Like, for real? Look at this. What kind of thing? Like, it goes all the way up into there.
He didn't post it for clout. He didn't tag Bigfoot influencers or try to monetize the clip. He posted it asking for help. Just that. Help. He said he didn't know what he was looking at, didn't know what to do, and was genuinely asking if anyone had ever seen anything like what his trail camera had captured. And when I watched the clip for the first time, I understood exactly why he was scared. Here's what we're looking at. A motion detection trail camera, the kind hunters use to monitor game movement, positioned in deep Alaskan wilderness. It's nighttime. Heavy snow on the ground, the kind of deep midwinter pack you only get in the interior. Two trees frame the shot like a natural doorway, with dense boreal forest stretching into blackness behind them. And standing right in the center of that frame, perfectly upright, perfectly still, is something that should not be there. It's a Bigfoot. I know how that sounds. I know half of you just rolled your eyes. But stay with me, because the footage is only the beginning of this story. The Bigfoot is standing there, motionless, staring directly into the camera lens, not reacting to it, not flinching, just standing and watching. The posture alone is what first grabbed me. This isn't hunched over like a bear on its hind legs. The shoulders are squared, the arms hang naturally at its sides, and the proportions are all wrong for a human. Too broad across the chest, too tall, the arms hanging just a little too long. Then it moves. In the next frames, the Bigfoot suddenly lurches forward in this aggressive, explosive motion, almost like a charge. It covers ground terrifyingly fast, and then it cuts hard to the right and vanishes from the frame entirely. The whole sequence lasts maybe 10 seconds. Standing, staring, charging, gone. 10 seconds of footage that I've now watched probably 200 times, and I still get chills every single time. Now let me point out a few things about this Bigfoot while the image is still fresh in your mind. The body is covered in dark hair, but it's not uniform like a fursuit would be. You can see variation in the way the hair lies across the shoulders versus the arms versus the legs. The face is dark, almost black, and the features are hard to make out in the trail cam's infrared flash. But the brow ridge is massive. That heavy, pronounced brow is something that comes up constantly in eyewitness reports, and it's one of the hardest features to replicate in a costume. The hands are enormous, hanging well past where a human's hands would fall, and they appear lighter in color than the rest of the body, almost pale. That detail alone matches dozens of independent reports I've read over the years. But here's the thing, the footage alone isn't what convinced me this is something real. I personally think this is one of the most credible pieces of evidence I've ever covered on this channel. And the reason has nothing to do with the video quality or the Bigfoot's appearance. It's what the hunter found when he made the mistake of going back to that camera. That's the story I need to tell you today, and I promise you, by the end of this, you're going to be looking at this footage very differently. So let me walk you through what we know. The Reddit post went up quietly, no dramatic title, no clickbait, Just a guy describing how he runs a handful of trail cameras on remote land in Alaska. He uses them to track game movement, mostly moose and caribou patterns during the winter months. He's not a Bigfoot enthusiast. He's not a paranormal investigator. He's a hunter. That's it. He checks his cameras every couple of weeks, pulls the SD cards, reviews the footage at home, and plans his hunts accordingly. Most of the time, the cameras catch exactly what you'd expect. Deer moving through at dawn, foxes trotting along game trails, the occasional wolf passing through, which always gets your attention but is nothing unusual for that part of the world. Routine stuff. The kind of footage that makes you nod and think, okay, there's activity in this corridor, I'll set up here next weekend. Nothing that would make you lose sleep. But when he pulled the SD card from this particular camera, one he had placed deeper into the tree line than his usual spots, he found the clip. And I want you to understand something about the way he described his reaction, because it tells you a lot about the kind of person we're dealing with here. He didn't immediately jump to Bigfoot. He didn't post it with some breathless caption about finally having proof. His first thought was that a bear had stood up briefly in front of the camera. That's a rational, grounded response from someone who spends real time in the Alaskan bush. But then he watched it again, and again, and again, the way the figure moved, the proportions of the body, the way it charged and then cut sideways with this fluid, deliberate motion. That wasn't a bear. Bears don't move like that. Bears don't stand with squared shoulders and arms at their sides. And bears definitely don't charge forward and then sidestep out of frame like they're running a football drill. Whatever this was, it was something the hunter had never encountered in years of working that land. His post wasn't sensational, it was scared. He asked the community flat out, "Has anyone seen anything like this, and what am I supposed to do?" Some commenters called it fake, which happens every single time. I'm used to it. Others said it was the clearest trail cam footage they'd seen in years. But what stood out to me was that the hunter wasn't engaging with the debate. He wasn't defending the footage or arguing with skeptics. He was asking practical questions. Should I go back out there? Is this dangerous? What should I do about my other cameras? That's not the behavior of someone trying to go viral. That's someone who is genuinely rattled. And I want to address the skeptics directly here because I know what some of you are already typing in the comments. Yes, trail cameras can produce weird images. Yes, infrared flash can make ordinary animals look strange. I've seen trail cam photos of deer that look like alien creatures because of the way the flash caught their eyes. I get it. But I've also spent enough time analyzing this kind of footage to know the difference between a weird photo artifact and something that genuinely doesn't fit any known animal. This Bigfoot isn't a bear standing on its hind legs caught at an odd angle. The proportions are wrong for a bear in every single measurement. The leg to torso ratio, the arm length, the shoulder width, none of it matches any bear species found in Alaska. And bears on their hind legs don't charge forward and then sidestep. That's bipedal locomotion, and it's smooth and coordinated in a way that only something accustomed to walking upright can achieve. Now here's where the story takes a turn that separates this from every other trail cam clip floating around the internet. Against every single comment telling him to stay away, the hunter decided to go back to the camera location. His reasoning was practical, and honestly, I kinda respect it, even though I think it was a terrible idea. He said he had other cameras out there that needed checking, and he wasn't going to let one weird clip keep him off his own land. That's the Alaskan mentality right there. You don't back down from the wilderness. It's your backyard. He went during daylight, he went armed. And he brought his phone to record, which thank God he did, because what he documented next is what takes this whole thing from interesting footage to something that I personally think deserves serious investigation. He drove out to his property, hiked to the camera location, and found the trail cam still mounted exactly where he had left it. Undamaged, still powered on, still recording. Which he found strange, and I do too. In a lot of Bigfoot reports, cameras get destroyed, ripped off trees, smashed, thrown. This one was untouched. And that untouched camera actually raises an interesting question that I've been thinking about. If this Bigfoot was aware of the camera, and based on its behavior in the footage, I believe it was, then why didn't it destroy it? One theory is that it simply didn't understand the technology. It saw a box on a tree and didn't connect it to any kind of threat. But another possibility, and this one is more unsettling, is that the Bigfoot didn't care. It wasn't trying to hide. It knew the camera had captured its image, and it made no effort to prevent that. Almost like it was confident that even if humans saw the footage, it wouldn't matter. It could still control the situation. And based on what happened when the hunter went back, I'd say that confidence was completely justified. But the area around the camera was a completely different story. The snow was disturbed in ways that didn't match normal animal traffic. And I'm not talking about random tracks from deer or rabbits passing through. I'm talking about deliberate paths, like something had been walking back and forth along the same line over and over, pacing.
Bro, like, look how wide these are from each other. What kind of thing made these steps, dude? Like, it goes all the way up into there.
The snow was packed down in these corridors that ran parallel to the camera's field of view. Whatever had been there, it had spent time in that spot, not just passing through, lingering. Then he found the footprints. This is where the phone footage comes in, and this is the part that honestly made my jaw drop. He panned his phone down to the snow, and there they were. Massive impressions, deep and clearly defined, each one easily twice the size of his boot. He filmed himself stepping into one of the prints, and his entire boot fits inside it with room to spare on every side. We're not talking about a slightly bigger foot. We're talking about a print that dwarfs a grown man's boot, like an adult shoe next to a toddler's. But here's the detail that really got me, and I hope you're paying attention because this is crucial. It's not just the size of the prints, it's the stride length. The distance between each footprint is enormous. We're talking about gaps that would require someone at least 7 or 8 feet tall with an unnaturally wide gait to produce. A normal human, even a very tall one, a basketball player, an NFL lineman, could not replicate that stride naturally while walking through deep snow. And the depth of the impressions tells you that whatever made them was heavy, seriously heavy. We're talking about something that sinks into packed snow the way a vehicle tire would. I've looked at a lot of alleged Bigfoot footprints over the years. And one of the things that separates genuine prints from fakes is the way weight distributes through the impression. When a human walks through snow, the heel strikes first, and the impression is deeper at the back. When someone fakes a print using a wooden cutout or a mold, the depth tends to be uniform because they're just pressing straight down. But these prints, from what the hunter filmed, show a natural gait pattern. Deeper at the heel, a visible roll through the midfoot, and a push-off at the toes. That's biomechanics. That's a real foot belonging to something alive and walking naturally. You can fake the shape of a footprint, but faking the weight distribution pattern of a several hundred-pound biped walking through varying snow depth is essentially impossible. The prints led away from the trail camera, heading deeper into the forest toward thicker brush and steeper terrain. The hunter followed them for a while, maybe 100 yards or so, and he noted something that experienced trackers will immediately recognize as significant. The stride never shortened, it never stumbled. There were no drag marks, no signs of the feet sliding or adjusting for balance. Whatever made these prints was moving through deep snow in total darkness, with the confidence and ease of something perfectly adapted to that environment. That's not a person in boots trudging through a winter forest. That's something else entirely. The hunter kept going. I know. If this were a horror movie, this is the part where you'd be yelling at the screen. But he's a hunter. He tracks things for a living. And the trail of evidence was pulling him forward the way a good scent pulls a bloodhound. He couldn't stop. And honestly, part of me is glad he didn't, because what he found deeper in those woods paints a picture that's hard to explain away. About a quarter mile past the camera, he started finding broken branches, not snapped by wind or knocked down by a falling tree. These were branches at roughly 7 to 8 feet high that had been twisted and wrenched sideways. If you've ever tried to break a live branch off a tree, you know it doesn't snap clean. It tears, it shreds, and that's exactly what these look like. Something with enormous hand strength had grabbed these branches and pulled them until the wood gave way. The breaks were fresh, the exposed wood still light-colored, not weathered or dried. He found a spot where the snow was compressed in a rough circle, maybe 6 or 7 feet across, like something large had sat or crouched there for an extended period. Nearby, bark had been stripped from a tree trunk at about chest height. Not claw marks like you'd see from a bear sharpening its claws. Long vertical strips peeled downward like someone had grabbed the bark and pulled it off in ribbons. I've seen this exact kind of tree damage described in Bigfoot reports from the Pacific Northwest, from Appalachia, from the Yukon. It's one of those recurring details that keeps showing up across completely unrelated accounts from people who have never met each other. And then there was the smell. The hunter mentioned it almost casually in his post, but it jumped out at me because it's another one of those details that lines up perfectly with decades of Bigfoot reports. He described a heavy, musky odor in certain areas, not like a dead animal and not like any predator scent he'd encountered in his years of hunting. It came in waves, stronger in some spots and completely absent in others, as if whatever had produced the scent had lingered in specific places longer than others. He said it was unlike anything he'd ever smelled in the Alaskan bush, and this is a man who has probably encountered every animal scent that wilderness has to offer. I did some digging on this because the scent component is something I find really fascinating. Primatologists have documented that most great ape species produce distinctive odors, particularly when stressed or engaged in territorial behavior. Male gorillas, for example, produce a powerful musky scent from axillary glands when they're agitated or asserting dominance. If Bigfoot is a primate, which the physical evidence strongly suggests, then a stress-related or territorial scent would make perfect biological sense. And the fact that the scent was concentrated in specific areas, the spots where the Bigfoot had apparently lingered, suggests it may serve as a form of territorial marking. The Bigfoot wasn't just passing through that forest, it was marking its boundaries. And the hunter had walked right through them. Now, if you've been following this channel for a while, you know that these signs, the tree breaks, the bark stripping, the territorial pacing, the overwhelming musk, these come up over and over and over in Bigfoot reports across North America. You can find them in accounts from Washington State, from Northern California, from the deep woods of Tennessee. The consistency is what gets me. These aren't details that hoaxers typically think to include. A person faking Bigfoot evidence will give you a footprint, maybe some blurry footage, and call it a day. They don't think about bark damage patterns at 7 feet high. They don't think about the stride to height ratio and footprints. They don't manufacture a musky scent and distribute it unevenly across a quarter mile of forest. The details in this account are the kind that only show up when someone is describing something they actually encountered. Here's where the story shifts from investigation to something much more unsettling. And I want to be clear about what I mean because the hunter described this with a level of specificity that gave me chills when I read it. And I think it'll do the same for you. He had been following the tracks and examining the evidence for maybe 20 minutes. He was deep in the trees at this point, well past his trail camera, well into unfamiliar territory. And then the forest went completely silent. If you've spent time in the wilderness, you know what I'm talking about. There's a specific kind of silence that happens when a predator enters an area. The birds stop, the insects go quiet, even the wind seems to hold its breath. Every small animal in the vicinity knows something dangerous is close, and they all go still at once. It's an unmistakable feeling, and experienced outdoorsmen recognize it instantly. The hunter recognized it, and it stopped him dead in his tracks. He stood there listening, nothing, no birds, no wind through the branches, no distant sounds of any kind. Just absolute, oppressive silence. And then he heard it, a single heavy footstep. Not in front of him, where the tracks he'd been following led deeper into the woods, behind him. Between him and his way back to the trail camera, between him and his truck, between him and safety. He told me, and I'm paraphrasing here, that every instinct in his body told him not to turn around quickly, not to make sudden movements. He stood frozen for what he said felt like 5 minutes, but was probably 30 seconds just listening. No second footstep came, just that one deliberate heavy impact in the snow behind him. He finally turned slowly and scanned the trees. Nothing visible, no movement, no shape, no shadow. Just empty forest and silence. Now I want you to think about what that means from a practical standpoint. This is the Alaskan interior in winter. The snow is deep enough that every step a human takes makes noise. Branches crack underfoot. Snow crunches and squeaks in sub-zero temperatures. Even the most experienced woodsman in the world can't walk silently through conditions like that. The hunter himself was making noise with every step he took, and he knew it. He could hear his own breathing, his own heartbeat, the fabric of his jacket rubbing with each movement. The forest was so quiet that these tiny sounds seemed deafening, and yet something massive had been walking directly behind him without producing a single audible footfall until it chose to. I've thought about this detail a lot since I first read the account, and it genuinely bothers me. We're not talking about a creature sneaking up on someone in a noisy environment where sounds can be masked. We're talking about dead silence. Total, absolute silence where you can hear a pine needle drop from a branch 50 feet away. And this Bigfoot moved through that environment like a ghost until the exact moment it decided to announce itself. That suggests a level of physical control and environmental mastery that is frankly terrifying. But here's the part that made my blood run cold. He looked down at the snow behind him, at his own tracks leading back the way he'd come. And running alongside his tracks, paralleling them almost perfectly, was a second set of footprints, the same massive prints he'd been following. Something had been walking behind him, stepping where he stepped, matching his pace, following his exact trail. And he never heard it. Not once. Not until it wanted him to. Think about that for a second. This is deep snow. We're talking knee-deep in places. And something weighing what must be several hundred pounds at minimum was able to walk directly behind a trained, alert hunter without making a single sound. The only reason he knew it was there at all was because it chose to let him know. That one footstep wasn't an accident. It wasn't the Bigfoot getting clumsy. It was deliberate. It was a message. I'm here. I've been here the whole time, and now you know. The hunter didn't run. He said running felt like the worst possible choice, and I think he was right. He backed away slowly, keeping his eyes on the tree line, rifle up but not aimed at anything specific because there was nothing specific to aim at. The silence held. He kept backing up until he reached his trail camera, then he turned and walked as fast as he could without breaking into a run back to his vehicle. He got in, drove out, and he hasn't been back since. He mentioned in one of his later comments that the drive home was almost worse than the forest. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely grip the steering wheel. The adrenaline hit him in waves, and he kept checking his rearview mirror even though he was on a road miles from where the encounter happened. That kind of physiological response, the shaking, the hypervigilance, the inability to calm down for hours afterward, that's consistent with someone who has experienced a genuine threat to their life. Your body doesn't produce that response because you saw a bear track or got spooked by a shadow. That's a survival response. That's your nervous system telling you that you are in the presence of something dangerous and you're lucky to have walked away from it. I personally think this is the most terrifying part of the entire account. Not the footage, not the footprints, the fact that this Bigfoot was smart enough to observe the hunter observing its territory. It watched him examine the footprints, it watched him photograph the broken branches and the bark damage. It let him document everything. And then, when it had seen enough, it let him know with one single footstep that the dynamic had always been reversed. He wasn't tracking the Bigfoot was studying him. Now I want to put all of this into context because Alaska isn't just any wilderness. It has one of the richest and most deeply rooted histories of Bigfoot-type sightings anywhere on the planet. And I'm not talking about modern reports from hikers and tourists. I'm talking about traditions that go back thousands of years, long before trail cameras and Reddit existed, long before anyone had ever used the word Bigfoot. What a lot of people don't realize is that Alaska actually ranks among the top states for Bigfoot sightings per capita. When you adjust for how few people actually live there and how remote most of the state is, the density of reports is staggering. The majority of these reports come from the interior and the panhandle, exactly the kind of dense, old-growth forest where our hunter had his cameras set up. And unlike reports from more populated states where you can sometimes chalk sightings up to misidentification or overactive imaginations, Alaskan reports tend to come from experienced outdoorsmen, bush pilots, fishing guides, and indigenous community members who have spent their entire lives in the wild. These are not people who mistake a bear for something else. These are people who see bears every single day and know exactly what a bear looks like, sounds like, and smells like. When they say what they saw wasn't a bear, I believe them. The indigenous peoples of Alaska, including the Tlingit, the Haida, and various Athabascan groups, have centuries of oral traditions describing large, hair-covered beings that live deep in the forests and mountains. These aren't treated as myths or ghost stories. They're spoken about the way you and I would talk about bears or wolves. They're part of the landscape. They're real animals that have always been there and that you learn to respect and avoid. Elders in these communities have warned for generations against following strange tracks into the deep woods, against camping alone in certain valleys, against making too much noise in places where these beings are known to live. In Tlingit tradition, there are stories of the Kushtaka, which is a broader category of beings, but shares many characteristics with what we'd call Bigfoot. A large, powerful, forest-dwelling creature that is intelligent enough to avoid humans but will confront people who encroach on its territory. The stories describe them as territorial, but not inherently aggressive. They don't hunt humans, they don't attack unprovoked, but they will make their presence known if you get too close to where they live. And they will absolutely let you know when it's time to leave. Sound familiar? Because that's exactly what happened to our hunter. I keep coming back to this point on this channel because I think it's one of the most overlooked pieces of the Bigfoot puzzle. These aren't stories that started in the 1960s when the Patterson-Gimlin film made Bigfoot a pop culture phenomenon. These are traditions that predate European contact in North America. Multiple indigenous cultures, separated by thousands of miles and with no communication between them, independently developed nearly identical accounts of the same type of creature. At some point, you have to stop calling that a coincidence and start asking what these people were actually seeing. And what's particularly interesting about the Alaskan traditions is the emphasis on intelligence. In many of these oral histories, the creatures aren't described as mindless animals. They're described as clever, calculating beings who understand human behavior and use that understanding to maintain their distance. Some stories describe them mimicking the sounds of other animals to confuse hunters. Others describe them deliberately laying false trails to lead people away from their real dwelling places. These aren't the behaviors of a dumb animal stumbling through the forest. These are the behaviors of an intelligent species that has been actively managing its relationship with humans for centuries. And then there's the sheer scale of Alaska's wilderness. I don't think most people truly grasp how vast and how empty the interior of this state is. We're talking about millions upon millions of acres of boreal forest, mountain ranges that have never been surveyed on foot, river valleys where no human being has ever set up camp. Alaska has more square miles of untouched, unexplored wilderness than most countries have total land area. If a large primate species existed and had evolved specifically to avoid detection, this is exactly, and I mean exactly, the kind of environment where it would thrive. This hunter's experience doesn't exist in a vacuum. Alaska has produced some of the most compelling Bigfoot encounters on record, and the patterns are remarkably consistent. Hunters and trappers across the state have described the same sequence of events for decades. You set up in a remote area, you start noticing signs that something is watching you, and then you have an experience that makes you rethink everything you thought you knew about the wilderness. There's a pattern that shows up in Alaskan reports more than anywhere else, and it's the one the hunter described. The feeling of being watched, followed by the discovery that something has been paralleling your movements. Trappers have reported finding their own tracks flanked by massive footprints that weren't there when they first walked through. Hunters have described hearing a single branch snap behind them in forest so remote that the nearest other human being is 50 miles away. These aren't campfire stories. These are reports from professionals who spend their lives in the bush and who have no interest in Bigfoot fame. One thing I find particularly compelling about Alaskan encounters is the seasonal pattern. Reports spike in the fall and early winter, which is exactly when game animals are on the move, when salmon runs are ending, and when food sources become scarcer. If Bigfoot is a real biological animal, it would need to eat a lot. A creature that size in that climate would need thousands of calories a day to maintain body heat and function. Fall and early winter are precisely when a large omnivore would be most active, most desperate, and most likely to overlap with human hunters who are also pursuing the same game trails. Our hunter set up his trail cameras specifically to track winter game movement, which means he placed those cameras in exactly the corridors that a hungry Bigfoot would also be using. He didn't go looking for Bigfoot, he put himself directly in its path without knowing it. And then there's Portlock. If you haven't heard the story of Portlock, Alaska, buckle up, because it's one of those accounts that's almost too wild to believe, except that it's documented. Portlock was a small coastal village in the Kenai Peninsula that was reportedly abandoned in the 1940s and 1950s because residents were being terrorized by a large, aggressive creature. People went missing from the surrounding forest. Hunters left camp and never came back. When searchers finally found some of the remains, the injuries didn't match anything that a bear or any other known predator would inflict. What makes the Portlock case so compelling is that it wasn't one or two isolated incidents. It was a sustained pattern of encounters over years that escalated in frequency and aggression until an entire community decided that leaving was the only option. These weren't superstitious people prone to flights of fancy. They were fishermen, hunters, and loggers who had lived alongside Alaskan wildlife their entire lives. They knew what bears looked like. They knew what wolves were capable of. And whatever was terrorizing their village was neither. The accounts describe something bipedal, massive, and bold enough to approach structures during daylight hours. Local indigenous elders reportedly warned the residents when they first settled the area that it was not a safe place to build, but those warnings were dismissed. It took years of increasingly terrifying encounters before the settlers reached the same conclusion the indigenous people had known for generations. The entire community eventually relocated, just packed up and left. The village sits empty to this day. You can find it on a map, this little ghost town on the coast of Alaska, abandoned not because of economics or weather or disease, but because something in the woods around it was too dangerous to coexist with. And the descriptions the residents gave of whatever was out there match Bigfoot reports almost exactly. Large, upright, covered in dark hair, incredibly strong, and intelligent enough to target isolated individuals while avoiding groups. I want to add one more account here because it relates directly to what our hunter experienced. There's a well-documented case from the 1990s involving a remote cabin owner in interior Alaska who reported a Bigfoot returning to the same area around his property every autumn like clockwork. He would find massive footprints around his cabin, hear bipedal footsteps circling the structure at night, and occasionally catch glimpses of a large, dark figure at the tree line at dusk. Over several years, he noticed that the Bigfoot seemed to study his routines. It would appear shortly after he arrived at the cabin for the season and disappear once he left. It never damaged his property. It never approached aggressively. It just watched. Year after year after year. The man eventually came to believe the Bigfoot was monitoring him out of curiosity rather than hostility, which is a conclusion our Reddit hunter might well reach if he ever goes back. What happened in Portlock and what this hunter experienced in 2026 are separated by almost 80 years. The locations are different. The people involved couldn't be more different. But the pattern is identical. Something large, intelligent, and territorial made it clear that humans were not welcome in its domain. And in both cases, the humans eventually listened and left. I personally think that says a lot more about the intelligence of these creatures than any footprint analysis or thermal imaging ever could. So let's circle back to the footage now because I want you to look at it again with fresh eyes. Before the hunter's investigation, this was a 10-second trail cam clip. Interesting, sure. Worth debating, absolutely. But now that we know what was found at that location, now that we know the Bigfoot tracked the hunter and deliberately revealed its presence, that clip takes on a completely different weight. Look at the Bigfoot's posture in that first frame. It's not surprised by the camera, it's not startled, its head is slightly tilted like it's examining the device. The body is squared to the lens, shoulders facing the camera directly. I personally think the Bigfoot knew the camera was there. Whether it understood what the camera did is another question entirely, but it wasn't accidentally caught in the frame. It positioned itself directly in front of the lens and stood there. That's not random wildlife behavior, that's awareness. The charge is what I keep coming back to. Watch it again closely. The Bigfoot doesn't charge at the camera. It explodes forward toward the camera's field of view and then cuts hard to the right, out of frame. It's almost like a bluff charge, the same behavior you see in gorillas when they want to intimidate without actually attacking. Was it testing the camera to see if it would react? Was it displaying aggression as a territorial warning? Or was it simply showing the camera, and by extension anyone who might watch the footage, that it was there and that it was not afraid? I don't know, but the movement itself is incredibly deliberate. And then the last frame. Empty forest. The Bigfoot is just gone, from full charge to completely vanished in under 2 seconds. And here's what gets me. The snow barely looks disturbed in its wake. For something that large, that fast, to move through deep snow and leave almost no trace of its exit, that tells you something about what we're dealing with. That's not a person in a costume stumbling through a snowfield. That's something built for this environment the way a fish is built for water. It moves through the Alaskan wilderness like it was born in it, because it was. There's another detail in the footage that I haven't seen anyone else point out, and it's been bugging me since I first watched this clip. When the Bigfoot is standing still in that initial frame, there's a slight vapor visible near its face. It's breathing. You can see the condensation from its breath in the cold air. That's a biological organism respiring in sub-zero conditions. A CGI rendering wouldn't include that detail. A person in a suit, sure, they'd be breathing too. But combined with everything else we're seeing, it's one more piece of a picture that points towards something alive, something real, standing in front of that camera. I've had people in the comments on my previous videos say clips like this are CGI, they're a suit, they're a hoax. And look, I get it, skepticism is healthy, and I encourage it. But when you pair this footage with the footprints, the physical evidence at the site, the tree breaks, the bark stripping, the musky scent, and the hunter's first-hand account of being followed and then deliberately revealed to, at some point you have to ask yourself what explanation actually fits all of the evidence. Because a guy in a gorilla suit wandering around the Alaskan backcountry at night in deep winter doesn't check a single one of those boxes. And that brings me to something that frustrates me more than almost anything else in this field. The silence. The complete and total lack of follow-up from anyone with authority or resources. This hunter has trail camera footage. He has phone footage of footprints that are clearly not human. He has a documented physical scene with multiple categories of evidence. He has a first-hand account from a credible, experienced outdoorsman. And nobody with any authority is looking into it. The hunter's Reddit account went quiet after his initial posts. I tried to reach out to him directly, no response. And this is a pattern I see over and over and over again with credible Bigfoot encounters. The person posts their experience, they get overwhelmed by the attention, a mix of believers and trolls and people calling them a liar, and they go silent. They delete their posts, they stop responding. The experience was frightening enough, and then the internet makes it worse. But the bigger issue is institutional. Where is the Alaska Department of Fish and Game? Where's the National Park Service? If a hunter in Alaska reports a trail camera sighting of an unidentified large primate with corresponding physical evidence, shouldn't somebody at least go take a look? If someone reported a new bear species or an unknown wolf subspecies, there would be a team in the field within a week. But the moment you say the word Bigfoot, suddenly nobody wants to touch it. The evidence sits there. The footage circulates online for a few weeks, and then it gets buried under the next news cycle. I've talked about this before on the channel, and I'll keep talking about it because it drives me crazy. We spend millions of dollars looking for new species in the deep ocean, in remote caves, in tropical canopies. We celebrate every time we discover a new frog or a new deep-sea fish. But the idea that a large, intelligent primate might exist in the most remote wilderness areas of North America, areas where we regularly lose fully equipped human beings without a trace, that's somehow too ridiculous to investigate? I don't buy it. I personally think there are people in positions of authority who know more than they're willing to say publicly. And I think cases like this one are exactly why they stay quiet. And you know what really gets to me? The amount of undiscovered species we find every single year. Just in the last decade, scientists have cataloged thousands of previously unknown species on this planet. New primates, new large mammals, species that had been living right alongside us for centuries without us knowing. In 2017, they discovered a new species of orangutan in Sumatra. that had been overlooked for decades, despite living on an island with millions of human inhabitants. If we can miss an entire species of great ape on a populated island in Southeast Asia, how can anyone say with certainty that there's nothing hiding in 8 million acres of uninhabited Alaskan wilderness? The arrogance of that position honestly baffles me. There's also the uncomfortable reality that investigating Bigfoot claims is a career killer in academic and government circles. Wildlife biologists who express even mild interest in the subject get ridiculed. Park rangers who file unusual reports get told to drop it. There's a social cost to taking this seriously that has nothing to do with the evidence and everything to do with institutional pride. Nobody wants to be the person who approved an official Bigfoot investigation. So the evidence piles up, the reports keep coming, and the official response remains the same comfortable silence it's always been. People always ask me, if Bigfoot is real, why haven't we found a body? And I'll tell you what I always tell them. We lose hundreds of people in Alaska's wilderness every single year. Full-grown adults with GPS devices and emergency beacons and bright-colored jackets, and we cannot find them. Search and rescue teams with helicopters and thermal imaging and trained dogs go out and come back empty-handed more often than any of us want to admit. We literally cannot find human beings in these forests. So the argument that we should have stumbled across remains of a creature that has spent potentially thousands of years specifically evolving to avoid human contact. A creature that is clearly intelligent, clearly aware of its environment, and clearly capable of moving through that environment without being detected. I just don't think that argument holds up when you actually consider the scale of the wilderness we're talking about. Alaska alone has over 663,000 square miles of land area. The boreal forest in the interior stretches for hundreds of miles in every direction with no roads, no trails, and no human presence. You could hide an entire civilization in there and we'd never know. And the body question assumes these creatures aren't intelligent enough to handle their dead the way other primates do. Great apes have been observed mourning their dead, staying with bodies, covering them. Some primatologists believe certain ape species may deliberately dispose of remains. If Bigfoot has anything approaching human-level intelligence, and the hunter's account of being deliberately tracked and messaged suggests it absolutely does, then it's entirely possible they handle death in a way that prevents remains from being found. They've had a very long time to figure out how to stay hidden. They're clearly very, very good at it. There's also something else worth considering. The Alaskan wilderness is not a gentle environment for biological remains. Scavengers work fast up there. Wolves, bears, ravens, foxes, they'll strip a carcass down to scattered bones in days. And bones in acidic forest soil break down surprisingly quickly, especially in areas with heavy seasonal moisture. We struggle to find the remains of known, documented animals in these conditions. The idea that we should have tripped over a Bigfoot skeleton when we can't even recover the bones of the thousands of moose and caribou that die in these forests every year. That expectation just doesn't hold up to the reality of how decomposition works in subarctic wilderness. So here's where we are. I've shown you everything I have. The trail cam footage showing a Bigfoot standing, staring, and charging in the Alaskan winter. The phone footage of footprints that make a grown man's boots look like a child's shoes. The physical evidence of broken branches, stripped bark, and compressed snow, and the hunter's account of following those tracks only to discover that the Bigfoot had been following him the entire time, revealing itself with a single deliberate footstep that said everything it needed to say without a single word. I personally think this is real. I've been doing this long enough to tell the difference between someone trying to sell a story and someone who is genuinely shaken by what they experienced. This hunter wasn't looking for fame. He was looking for answers. And the fact that the evidence at the scene perfectly matches decades of Bigfoot reports from across the continent details that a hoaxer would never think to include, tells me that whatever walked in front of that trail camera was not a person in a suit and it was not a bear. I also want to say something to the people who think every piece of Bigfoot footage is automatically fake. I understand that position, I really do. The field has been plagued by hoaxers and attention seekers for decades, and that's poisoned the well for legitimate evidence. But I'd ask you to consider something. If even 1% of the thousands of Bigfoot sightings reported every year across North America are genuine, just 1%, that still means dozens of real encounters happening annually with a creature that science has not officially recognized. At what point does the volume of consistent, independent, geographically diverse reports start to mean something? Because for me, we passed that point a long time ago. What I keep coming back to is that single footstep behind the hunter. That moment when the entire dynamic flipped. He thought he was the investigator. He thought he was the one doing the tracking. And the Bigfoot let him believe that right up until the moment it decided otherwise. That level of patience, that level of awareness, that level of intelligence, it honestly scares me more than any roar or charge ever could, because it means these creatures aren't just surviving out there in the Alaskan wilderness. They're thriving, they're watching, and they are far, far smarter than most of us are willing to admit. The hunter hasn't posted since. I'll keep trying to reach him, and if I ever make contact, you'll be the first to know. His cameras are still out there on that property, still recording. And whatever stood in front of that lens, whatever followed him through the snow and let him know with one footstep that the game was never what he thought it was, it's still out there too, somewhere in those millions of acres of frozen forest. It's watching, and it knows we're looking. You know what I think about sometimes? The fact that this Bigfoot let the hunter leave. It was behind him. It was between him and his vehicle. It had every advantage in that situation: strength, speed, terrain knowledge, darkness falling. And it chose to reveal itself with a single footstep and then let him walk away. That tells me something important about these creatures. They don't want conflict with us. They want to be left alone. And when we stumble into their world with our cameras and our rifles and our curiosity, they don't attack. They send a message. They let us know in the most controlled and deliberate way possible that we've crossed a line, and then they give us the chance to uncross it. That's not the behavior of an animal. That's the behavior of something that understands consequences, boundaries, and restraint. And frankly, that's more patience than most humans would show in the same situation. Let me know in the comments what you think about this footage. Do you think it's genuine? Have any of you had experiences in Alaska or anywhere else where you felt like something was watching you from the trees? I read every single comment, and I always appreciate the stories you share. If you're new here, consider subscribing because I cover encounters like this every week, and I promise you this rabbit hole goes a lot deeper than most people realize. Until next time, stay safe out there and maybe think twice before following strange tracks into the woods. I'm Alex, and I'll see you in the next one. For more interesting stories, check this out.